This video is sponsored by HelloFresh. There's something about a rotating spit of shawarma that ignites a deep hunger in me. The sight of the meat glistening as it rotates and chars and oozes juice, it's enough to set me in a trance. Many stronger people have succumbed to the might of a shawarma shop, but I find no salvation in the arms of most shawarma. You see, shawarma in Egypt is a bit different. We grill our beef shawarma, then mix it with parsley, tomatoes and onions, and then we cook it even more before putting it in a bun. Something about that process and the marinade makes it taste completely different from any other shawarma, and I want to share that with you. Luckily for you, I've got an amazing recipe from my mother-in-law. All you need is some cheap beef with a few other ingredients, and it all cooks together in a single pot. If you're new here, I'm Obi, and today I'll show you a simple beef shawarma recipe that you'll be making all the time. We'll discuss the cuts of beef and the secret marinade, then we'll cook it and make some amazing sandwiches. Now, let's get started. So first thing we need for our shawarma is a hunking piece of beef. If you want to make this with lamb or chicken, you can and it still will taste good, but this is supposed to be a beef recipe. Check out my chicken shawarma video for a real chicken shawarma recipe. Here I've got 1 kilogram or just over 2 pounds of beef topside, which is a lean and pretty cheap cut of beef. I went for it to show you that you can make this from anything, but I'd highly recommend something with good intra-muscular fat like beef ribeye, sirloin or even short ribs. Now importantly, I've got my meat in one whole piece. This will let us cut the meat into tender strips, but if you opt for using tender steaks, it isn't as important. To do that, look at the meat and take note of the grain, which is the direction the meat fibres lie in. You can clearly see they form lines in this direction, and to get tender strips of beef, we'll have to cut against the grain or at a 90-degree angle. I won't go into the science of it, but doing that shortens the protein fibres and makes the meat easier to chew. First, I'm taking the chunk of meat and slicing it into more manageable pieces. If your meat has some silver skin or gristle, you'll need to slice it off, as that won't dissolve while cooking. Take your smaller piece of meat and find the grain again. Here it is pointing to the corner, and so I'm looking at the sides to see which one has shorter fibres. This is what we want to avoid, so turning it to this side it looks good. Now I can slice it into strips going against the direction of the grain like this. You can see this slice now has lots of small clusters of meat fibres, and that's exactly what you want. This strip is about twice the width that we want it, so I've just cut the piece of beef in half, and then I'll slice each of those pieces into strips. Obviously I went through all the beef and I repeated the same process. Your aim should be to cut the meat into strips that are about 5 to 7 millimeters wide and thick, and anywhere between 3 to 6 centimeters long. Here's what my meat ended up looking like. Next up, we'll make the marinade, which will flavour and tenderize the meat. The key ingredients are the zest of 1 whole orange and 1 whole lemon. That's a lot of zesting, which would usually take forever, but I've got a trusty microplane here which makes quick work of the orange and lemon. Make sure you don't zest the pith underneath the skin, and you'll end up with about 2 teaspoons of orange zest and 1 teaspoon of lemon zest. The other major ingredient in the marinade is 2 to 3 medium onions. These will flavour the meat, but they also contain an enzyme which helps to tenderize it as well. Roughly chop, then add the onions to a blender, then add your orange and your lemon zest. Next, add 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of pepper, half a teaspoon of baharat or Middle Eastern 7 spice, and half a teaspoon of sumac. Finally, you'll add in 5 tablespoons of white or distilled vinegar, and then you'll blend it all together. If you don't have the baharat spice, you can just leave it out, and if you want to add some heat, you can do that too. Once your mixture looks like this, you're ready to add it to the meat. I've got my pot here that I'll be cooking the meat in, and you should actually marinate directly in it to keep all the juices. Place the meat inside, then pour over the onion marinade, and give it a very thorough mix. You can see I've completely coated all the meat in the marinade, and that will ensure we get loads of great flavour in every bite. The last thing you'll do is add in 1 large tomato and 1 green chilli. Set the pot aside and let this marinate for 2 to 3 hours. When your 2 hours are up, the meat will have darkened a bit. Put the pot on your stove and turn the heat up to high, then cover it with a lid. The heat and steam that's generated will force the liquid out of the beef, and we won't need to add any liquids to the pot. You want to bring it to a light boil, and when it looks something like this, turn the heat down to medium-low. I'll discuss this later, but if you are adding any beef or lamb fat to the shawarma, this is where you add it to the pot. The meat now needs to cook until tender, which for this topside took about 1.5 hours. If you're going with a better cut of meat, it will take much less time, so check it sooner. While the shawarma cooks, let's take a moment to thank today's sponsor HelloFresh. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit, and recently it's been helping me a lot in the kitchen. With YouTube and my full-time job, I struggle to think of good healthy meals that I can eat during the week, so instead I get a delivery like this one. Every week there are 50 menu items that you can choose from, and with more 5-star recipes than any other meal kit, I know the food will be good. I don't have to deal with the stress of planning my meals and getting the ingredients because they send you everything pre-portioned. That cuts out a lot of the prep work, and I don't end up with leftover ingredients or food waste. What I love is that they give you these great recipe cards for each of their chef curated meals, and the steps make it so easy to cook foods that you've never tried before. If I'm going out of town or I fancy making something else instead, they also make it really easy to skip a week whenever I need to. And while I'm eating these delicious meals, I know that HelloFresh is helping people who face food insecurity. They donated over 4 million meals to charity in 2020 and are stepping up their donations amid the pandemic. So if you want to try some delicious meals, which is probably why you're on my channel, then go to hellofresh.com and use my code MIDDLEEATS14 to get 14 free meals including free shipping. The link is in the description box below and you'll be supporting the channel when you use it. That's 14 free meals with code MIDDLEEATS14. Thank you HelloFresh, now back to the shawarma. At this point the shawarma should be fully cooked, and you should taste it to make sure it's tender. The tomato and chili should have dissolved fully, and if not, mash them up slightly. To up the flavour and texture of the meat, I'm now going to add 3 tablespoons of beef fat or drippings. I got this from rendering down cubes of beef fat, but you can also get it at some supermarkets. This is actually a cheat, and the alternative is to get a solid chunk of preferably lamb fat and add it at the start of the cooking process. If you can't get animal fat at all, then use clarified or regular butter in its place. Let this melt, then stir the pot and cook it for about 15 minutes further. While it's finishing off, let's quickly make the salad. Take 1 red onion and cut it into strips like so. Place it in a bowl, then add half a teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of sumac. Mix this together really well and massage the salt into the onion. Let this sit for about 10 to 15 minutes and the salt will macerate the onion, removing the raw flavour. When that's done, add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice to it and set it aside. Now we'll make the tahini sauce by combining 75 grams of yogurt, 50 grams of tahina, 50 grams of water, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice and 1/4 teaspoon each of chili powder, white pepper, cumin and salt. Mix that all together really well until you have something that looks like this. Finally, you'll take 25 grams or a small bunch of parsley and roughly chop it like so. To bring it all together, take your pot and add your macerated red onions as well as the chopped parsley. Add 2 tablespoons of your tahini sauce as well, and then give that one final mix. Here's what mine looked like when I was done, and if yours looks remotely similar, you're in for a good meal. I like to serve my shawarma DIY style, alongside some extra salad and of course some great buns. I'm using brioche here because they look better on video, but something like a flour bap would be more authentic. When making your sandwich, give it a good dollop of the tahini sauce, then fill it with meat and your sandwich is done. This is just like the ones you get on the streets in Cairo, except there's no grilled flavour, which you usually can't notice anyway with beef shawarma. Now let's check out the taste test. Just take a look in there. Look at all that beef, the sauces, the onions and the parsley. That is a perfect sandwich. You're gonna have to give me a minute. I think it's really hard to beat this beef shawarma recipe. It's got an insane amount of flavour, and after cooking for almost 2 hours, it's really tender. Obviously you could upgrade this by using better meat like beef ribeye, but even this cheap meat works really well. I prefer Egyptian beef shawarma served in buns and Syrian chicken shawarma served in wraps, but you could definitely switch it up if you want to. Finally, this is a great option for a movie or games night, and you should consider introducing Shawarma Saturdays at home. I'm expecting loads of photos of your beef shawarma adventures, so make sure you tag me on Instagram. If you enjoy the dish and want to leave us a tip, head on over to our Patreon and become a member today. Thank you to all of our patrons for their valuable support and helping make these videos possible. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back next week with another video.